Welcome to Imprint, a podcast about creating a home and life you love. I'm Natalie Walton, and each week I'm sharing insights and interviews about the creative process to help encourage and inspire you wherever you're at on your journey. Before we start today's episode, I've got a quick question for you. Would you like to know how to make your home beautiful using what you've already got? Well, I've created a free ebook, 7 Days Your Guide to Styling Success. And all you have to do to grab a free copy is go to nataliewalton.com/the styling masterclass. Just fill out the form and you'll get it delivered direct to your inbox. I'll share how you can style your home in 7 easy steps. There's one activity for every day of the week. Just go to nataliewalton.com/the styling masterclass to download your free ebook. Hello everyone, I hope that you're all well. Today, I'm really excited to share an interview with Samantha Wills. Many of you will know her through her jewellery brand, which was of the same name. And after 15 years, she made a really big step and decided to close a business that was actually doing really well financially. It was profitable, it was continuing to grow, but it wasn't aligned with who she wanted to be anymore, and her creativity, what she required of that, really changed, and she was at a crossroads in her life. She wrote about this in her book of Gold and Dust, which is now out and available in all good bookstores. I actually grabbed a copy of it before we had the interview. Went to a local bookstore, even though she'd sent me one and I was waiting to receive it. But I thought, no, I'm going to go and grab a copy. And I read it in one go up until 2 o'clock in the morning. I could not put it down. It is a book for anyone who loves hearing about creative stories and creative journeys. It is a book for anyone who maybe has a tendency to put work first or to have perfectionist tendencies. But it really is a book that you can resonate with on so many levels, about having a dream and really trying to make it happen, about putting your health last or second. You know, it's something that you're always going to do one day. And it is about a book listening to your own intuition, about knowing what is right. So often I hear people struggle to know how to make the right decision, whether it comes to their life, their career, their home. Well, really, it is about learning to listen to your intuition and the voices within inside you, because you often know the answer. Anyway, I was very excited to talk to Samantha. She was very giving of her time and answered freely and honestly. She is incredibly vulnerable in the book and very open in this interview, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Hi Samantha, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to have this conversation because I've just finished your book and I finished it late last night. I could not put it down. And I can't tell you, it's actually been a long time since that has happened to me, where I couldn't put a book down. And I was just, your story is so compelling on so many levels. I think that it's a sort of book that a lot of people can resonate perhaps with different parts of it. And, and there were definitely a lot of things that I could resonate with it. I'm still kind of processing it, to be honest, because it's it's a very open and vulnerable kind of book. And it's, I think that because of that, it really touches so many things, certainly within me, and I'm sure other people would have the same experience. So yeah, anyway, so that's my preface this. And I guess I just wanted to say as well that I think part of it as well, I mean, it's all interesting, but, you know, I think everyone comes to it from their own journey, but that I mean, you know, it was a long time ago, but I had interviewed you many, many years ago when I was working at Real Living. And actually the image that one of the images in your book where you put kind of a green dress on, that is from that feature.
It is. Yes.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that then I was reading the book and then you're talking about that you'd actually moved back into your apartment. And so I had now this whole other backstory to that interview that I didn't know at the time. And while I was working at Real Living, I was given one of your beautiful jewelry boxes with, some jewels in it, so beautiful bracelets. And I remember the box, how beautiful. You got this whole story about the boxes, and now my daughters are in love with the boxes. So it's just
that's so nice.
And
full circle.
There's just these little touch points along the way that it sort of feels like, I guess you're a bit younger than me, but similar kind of age, both kind of being part of that magazine world in one way or another. And so it was really, it really resonated a lot. So I guess I should give you the opportunity to talk. And what I want to start with is one of the questions I wanted to ask you at the start, because I'm always interested to learn about people's childhood and how it informs who they are today. And now you do go into the book quite a lot about your entrepreneurial spirit as a child, but I wanted to start with that. Like, do you think that was nature or nurture? Because you do mention that your parents they had their own business, you were surrounded by that. Because obviously, but the creativity, was that something that was within you?
I think the creativity always, it's, I don't remember it kind of reached, like the entrepreneurial spirit reaching me at a certain point. So I think it was definitely something I was born with in a way, but I'm also an only child, which I think has some kind of bearing on, I don't know, it's like this, like you have to pave your own way in a way that you don't have, brothers or sisters. So it's kind of like, I remember a time being 3 or 4 and taking all the food out of mum's pantry and then setting up like a cafe and trying to sell it back to her kind of thing. So, and obviously I share some stories in the book of almost like, people are like, oh, you were so savvy back then to earn money as a kid. I was like, I think I was just a bit of a brat, like where I share a story in there about going and washing a sign at my parents' shop and I just washed half of it. And my dad's like, oh, it's going to look great when you finish because it's so dirty. And I was like, no, I have finished my free trial of it. So, I'll clean the rest for $20 kind of thing. So I don't know. I think there was a hustler in me always. I just, I didn't know it was going to take the path of entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to see that. And like you say, your parents did have their own businesses, but there was definitely something within you. You also talk a lot about the book, how, the jobs that you took after school, but you started working, creating jewelry and sort of selling it at the Bondi markets. And that was kind of the launch pad in many ways for your jewelry career. But what I'm kind of curious about at that time is to have that sort of that faith and belief in yourself. There's a lot of children or young women who wouldn't even have the courage to go and do that, to go and put their jewelry at the markets. What do you think that was? Was that a sort of a necessity? What was the drive within you at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I look back on it now and I'm like, I don't know if I would be that brave today, to be honest. I think, a lot of people use the word bravery back then and to start my business at 21 and, all these things. But I'm like, I don't know if it was actual bravery. I mean, it might have been in an underlying way, but I think it was naivety in a way where I really had nothing to lose. That inhibition that back then was, I don't know, I just compare it to now. If I had to make those type of decisions now, of putting myself out there, and, starting from scratch, I'm like, I would look at it really differently. So I think there's a bit of, bliss in the ignorance, if that makes sense. So, but I don't know, I think we spend so much time worrying about what other people will think of us when the reality is everyone's just thinking about themselves, like in the most consistent manner, that we're all quite selfish beings. So I remember my mum, in high school, I was like, oh, everyone's going to be looking at my shoes. And she's like, everyone's worried about their own shoes. Like, don't even worry. Like, it's like we spend so much time handing our power away to something that probably doesn't even exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, but yet it can be so crippling for so many.
Absolutely,
really hold them back.
Yeah.
And so I guess in a similar vein as well, I was sort of interested. You talk again a lot about in the book about your sort of your journey, sort of to building your business and so on, and we will touch on that. But about the creative side, you don't really go into so much about the process. And I wondered, obviously you were making your own jewelry right from the go. I mean, even as you say, at school, but did you have a strong sense of you were just making what you liked, or were you going out there for inspiration, or how did that kind of journey in terms of your own style when it came to jewelry, how did that evolve?
Yeah, well, I think jewelry, even as a category, I think a lot of people must have assumed that I had this love affair with jewelry. But to be honest, it wasn't jewelry that I loved so much. It was creating, and jewelry happened to be the vehicle that, at the time I could do on, even in school, I could, teach myself in a way. It didn't require, a huge investment. So it kind of organically became the vehicle. And then when I started to sell it, even while I was, had my real job, and I say real job as in my 9 to 5, normal job. And I would just I made for the love of making. So I think in that first instance, it was just creating as, when your hobby kind of merges into your vocation. Definitely as, the business grew and, not that the creativity shrunk, but you definitely, the more commercial a brand becomes, the more criterias you're having to meet. So, by year 10, for example, I'm literally given a matrix from our sales director being like, okay, David Jones need, 30 pairs of earrings under $100. They need X amount of rings at this price point. They need this, and you're working very much to a matrix when you get to that level of commerciality. So, I think that, and I say that to young entrepreneurs a lot of the time, I'm like, while it is, a creative undertone, you have to find a way, if you do want to, take it down that commercial avenue, to find a place where the art and the commerciality meet.
And what about in those kind of early days when you were sort of, you were still doing maybe the markets, or those early days of sort of focusing on your jewelry making? Did you have people who you looked up to in terms of them as a role model, what you wanted to be as a creative?
Yeah, I think, and around that time, so 2004, 2005, it was really an emergence of a lot of Australian female designers. Jodie Mears had started Tiger Lily, and I was just obsessed with anything that she did. It was entirely, a brand that I aspired to be a part of. And I think it was the first time that I really saw branding beyond a product. Like, that brand really spoke to me around touch point of, entering the world of Tiger Lily in a way. The girls from Sass and Bide obviously were doing brilliant things. Jamie Blakey from One Teaspoon. So, it was kind of this time where magazines were still the hierarchy of communication. So, every month these glossy fashion magazines would come out, and I'd, flip straight to the designer profile pages. And, in a good way and a bad way, I think at that time, social media wasn't around yet, which makes me sound like I'm about 2,000 years old, but it was, a time before. And, I would put these designer profiles up on my board above my dining table where I was making, jewelry till 4:00 in the morning. And in one way, they were so aspirational, but in another way, they were so isolating, because I was like, that beautifully styled, perfect glossy shot reflected nothing of the blood, sweat, and literal, blood and sweat and tears that I was experiencing at that table. So while you got, one insight into it in one way, there was also so much that wasn't spoken of back then, when it was just kind of a glossy perception.
Did you have any creative mentors? I mean, you don't really mention it in the book. I know that you sort of then went on to have like a business partner who became, I guess, a business mentor. But
Yes.
Did you have any kind of people around you or people above you that you, were more in the creative field?
No, I didn't. And it's really interesting, because I think as a creative person, you seek out what you're not strong at. So I was always seeking out, the business side of mentorship. And I never have ever, and I've never ever been asked that question. It's a great question. Did I seek creative mentors? And I think that's, really important in one way. And it's truly not something I've really put a lot of thought into. So, it's definitely as beneficial, I think, in many ways. But I think naturally my advice was always to surround yourself with people that are good at the things that you're not. And that's the avenue I took.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was really curious as well about, what do you think it was about your designs that resonated so much, that really helped you to cut through? Like, what was your unique point of difference, I guess, as a jewelry designer or as a brand?
I think in those early days, it was a time before, accessories stores or accessories brands kind of, Sports Girl might have had a tiny accessories department at that time, but it was almost like an afterthought to the apparel. So no one was really, investing in accessories, whether it be a vertical brand or in retail. So kind of getting into market when there wasn't a huge saturation on it. And to be honest, I don't know. It wasn't, I wouldn't say I was doing anything that was that crazily, innovative. There wasn't a lot of it in the market. I think it wasn't one singular thing. I think, doing the statement at the time, it was only earrings. I just launched with an earring collection. So it was the product in one way. And then it was, the story of someone being 21 and starting their own business and, coming from small towns. There was many pillars, I think, that piqued interest in the brand as an overall offering.
I mean, and do you think that part of it is also like just purely staying the course as well? I mean, I know you sort of talk about in the book that, it took you 12 years to become an overnight success, but do you think that just by staying around and persevering, that is kind of why you also cut through?
I think, as it went through and digital media and social media started to come in, I think we were quite an early adapter of talking with our consumer on social media, not to her. And I think that really, if you look at the traditional way, even before digital, so the traditional way was a brand would be the hierarchy, and essentially they'd use traditional advertising to talk down to their customer in a way of like, here's what we're doing this season, here's what you should buy. Then when digital media come in, it kind of like flattened that landscape and made it much more transparent. So, you couldn't charge X amount in one market and then X amount in another market for the same product. It kept you, a very transparent landscape there. And that was kind of more where a brand and a consumer would, then start to see each other a bit more on even par. And then I think social media added this element of vulnerability in. So we're able to speak, human to human in a way. And I think a lot of brands continue to speak to their consumer rather than with her. And I know for us that when you add vulnerability to that conversation, that's where community starts to form. And so, our consumers then began speaking with each other that way. And then that was where the community, and when you have community, you then get loyalty. And it just started to, it was a snowball effect when we really harnessed that element of it. So, well, I think, and as I say, anyone can replicate your product, they can replicate your packaging, but they cannot replicate your story. And I think we were so honest in the way that we told the story of our origins. And I think that people, related to that. And that was the longevity, and that was the integrity of the brand.
And the other thing that kind of kept striking me as well about your story is just, I mean, how hard you worked. I mean, you sort of give many examples of like your fingers bleeding while you're making the jewelry, and the crazy hours, the crazy travel. And there's a kind of a bit of a pattern that I see with people who are really successful, in the sense that they go through this process and then come out the other, like sort of have an epiphany, come out the other end and sort of say, like, don't do this. But then at the same time, do you think that it's possible to have that kind of level of success without kind of being a bit of a workaholic or a perfectionist? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you mean. I don't know, to be honest. And I think that, that depends on the individual's definition of success. For me, success in the early days was like, once we get it on a certain celebrity, or once we're seen in a certain magazine, then that's when we reach success. And then, obviously those milestones change over the time. But I think with, the DNA of a creative entrepreneur is like, what's next, what's next, what's next? And you kind of chasing, the next thing. And, it's the fuel, and it's also the death of it, because you're like, that's what keeps you moving and to reach those heights. But if you just keep, chasing the next thing, it ends up being a hamster wheel. So I think they go hand in hand with each other. And I don't know. I think that, and I didn't want to in any way try and add glamour to, glamorize the grind and the, that element. I think, what I wanted to do in writing this story was show the depths of what it did take and the sacrifices that had to be made to get it to that level. And I hope that, if another creative entrepreneur can, I don't think by sharing stories we actually teach, other people have to learn that, their journey their own way. But I hope in some way it allows people to get a bit of a framework for what that journey might look like and be able to anticipate certain things along the way, if that makes sense.
I know it's hard, isn't it? Because I can completely understand. Because I have that tendency too, is to, I'm a hard worker. Like that's always been my thing, and yet it's also the thing that people say, how do you do the things you do, and all of that sort of thing. But at the same time, it's like the curse as well,
right?
Because it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to stop.
But I do think that, and I talk about this a lot where I'm like, the concept of entrepreneurship, and, if we look at, I refer to it in this day and age as modern entrepreneurship because, a lot more people are getting involved in it. You don't necessarily have to have a business background or acumen to pursue it. Myself, case in point, it's like, but if you reflect on what entrepreneurialism, say, 30 years ago was known as, it was like hardcore business and, very related to the work mentality. And I think that when you talk about, burnout or, kind of chasing that next thing, and obviously that does fuel us in a way, if it's always kind of looked on as a bad thing, which I understand in one concept and especially as it relates to health. But then if you contrast that in a way to, I use the analogy of if someone was training to be an Olympic swimmer and they'd get up every morning at 3:00 and they're in the pool 5 times a day and they're, training and, watching what they eat and doing all these things to chase their dream to be an Olympic swimmer. People aren't going to sit there and be like, you're dedicated to your dream too much. Like you need to stop training as much because you're chasing your dream too hard. They'd be like, well done you. Like you're so dedicated, you're this, you're that. So I think it's when, it's the framework that I think the entrepreneurial journey holds in a way that, and I say that because I know if I sat here and just worked 9 to 5, I would not be fulfilled. I would still be, I'm not sitting there till, even now till, midnight or 1:00 in the morning. I do it because I want to do it in many cases. So I think there's a real differentiation on that journey to be like, working your own framework and not taking on when someone else thinks you're working too much. So I think there's an ebb and flow in that.
I think that's a really great analogy, actually. The Olympic swimmer, like you say, people see that as dedication,
right?
Not like kind of craziness. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Yeah. But I guess it's having those times where you're kind of working towards a specific goal, and then sort of taking a moment of appreciation of that, and then pausing before you go to the next goal, which I think that can sometimes be the hard thing when you have workaholic tendencies, it's like the next thing, and not actually pausing. Yeah,
I think that's the key in it all, staying in that moment a little while longer.
Yeah. And I guess another kind of big character trait of people who often have creative tendencies, and again, this is something you talk a bit about in the book, is we sort of touch on it, is like the kind of the creative control over the business. And I'm just curious about how much of a role did perfectionist, like, do you consider yourself a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist? Like, was that the thing that prevented you from hiring someone earlier as that kind of head designer? Do you know what I mean? Like, was it that you couldn't let control of that part of the process?
I think in that question, when we were looking for a head designer for me to step back, I think that was for a purpose. And I don't think we were ever going to find that individual, because at that time, my creative soul was pretty exhausted and was ready to have a rest and then start a new chapter. So I think that's more unique observation, but I think that definitely, yeah, I'm creatively anal retentive. Like it's still, even to this day, like it's a fault of mine if I ever, wanted to start a big organization again, because in some ways I like working in teams and working collaboratively, but I really do enjoy working by myself, and I enjoy that process. I like being accountable to myself in a creative way. And I even, when I'm like, and it's such a perfectionism thing that no one else really observes it, I think. And we overwork things as creatives because, that perfectionism in us. But I know many times in the business, it was me that was putting, a roadblock in expanding, throughout the book. I think I say through there where Jeff, my business partner, was like, hey, you need to get out of the road, kind of like shit or get off the pot kind of thing. Like you can't just hover there holding it up. So it's definitely something that I am very conscious of when I'm working with other people, because it's a bad trait of mine.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping for some huge insight in how to let go, of control, because so you're working on it too.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. I think we get so deeply ingrained into it, and then I think stepping away from anything is so healthy, even if it's for an hour, for a few days, if you can, and then revisiting it. Like we just get into this vortex that we hold on to it so tightly. So putting space between anything, even if it is just you and the computer screen, is a good move.
Yeah. And so again, you talk a lot about building a brand in general. Like there was many iterations of it throughout your kind of career with your brand, Samantha Wills jewellery, as well as like you had some other things on the side and you were helping other people, like the example with Yellow Glen. So what do you think? And brand is, so important these days, I think more than ever. So what do you think is like the thing that really helps define a brand or break through, cut through? What would you say it is?
I think first and foremost, consistency. I think as creative directors, sometimes, and oftentimes you're working so far in advance of when something is released, you can get bored with something. So you tweak things just for your own, creative amusement or, to change things up. But I like the consistency because people are, so bombarded with things. It's about, showing up consistently, be it in your brand language, your, corporate colors, all those, brand basic kind of things, and remaining true to that. And I think storytelling at the end of the day, it's such an overused, example in branding, but it's the one thing people cannot replicate. And if you're telling good stories, and that's how we as humans connect with each other. It's our, longest running art form. It was, from cave dwellers is how they would communicate through storytelling. Before we can even walk or talk, our parents are reading stories to us. So it's the way we like to receive information. We know how to receive information that way. So integrating that into brand, I think is paramount.
And of course, one of the big questions as well is that would you build a brand using your own name again? I guess that was one of the things that I was at the end. I was like, I wonder what, if you were to kind of create another, like, I know you've got your foundation and other things, but, if you were to sort of start again with creating something else, maybe it's something completely different or completely fashion or interiors or whatever it is. Like, would you use your name again or... Yeah, I don't know. I just wondered on your perspective.
It's a great question. I don't know. I have to say I would use my name again because it has afforded me so much. And, I'm such a, when I am in something, I'm 1,000% in it. So I think in that way, it interlocks with your life, and that worked for me. I understand that's not for everyone. If I had called it absolutely anything else other than Samantha Wills, I obviously would have sold the brand. So it's a completely different thought process, I think, going that way. But I don't know, if I had my time over again, I probably would say no. I would probably do a different brand name if I had my time over. Having said that, I'm very grateful, even though I didn't sell the business, I closed it. I did inherit, the database, and I inherited the brand currency, and everything that came along with that I retained, and that was important to me in that decision.
But I mean, there are other designers who have sold their name. I mean, didn't Tom Ford, that's what he did, didn't he? Like, I mean, I certainly know if there are other examples, but you just didn't want to go down that path.
Yeah, I to be honest, hadn't seen an Australian example that had done it successfully. And when I say successfully, meaning keeping the integrity of the brand of, and I think it's so personal to a creative founder, as you would know, it's like my heart just wasn't built in a way to take that chance and to, sell it off to a bigger organization and just see what they did with it. I think so much had been put into the brand, both, myself and some incredible women that worked on that brand. And to me, it was about honoring that legacy. I was not built in a way that I could see what someone else would do with it.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be the same too.
Mm.
So, I mean, obviously, towards the end of your journey with the business, it was phenomenally successful. And I know that you do work with sort of younger entrepreneurs with your foundation, but when you're starting out running a business, there are just so many things to consider. There's marketing and sales, and there's, you've got to get the quality right, and maybe dealing with suppliers and all of these different components. What are some of the biggest lessons that you learned about running a business, or the kind of advice that you would say to somebody who was starting something in the creative fields if they were running their business? Like, how do you kind of manage those decisions? What do you prioritize?
I think definitely as a creative, like I said before, surround yourself with people that are good at the things that you're not. Like, don't let ego get in the way of like you think you should be able to do it all. And like if it's about isolating yourself to do what you're best at is I think where you add the best value. If I was starting again today and I knew what I knew now, I would definitely have my financials in order earlier. And by that, I didn't start out with any money, but I would have, looked to implement a bookkeeper and, on their recommendation, the accountant that they work with, just to get some visibility. Because I think, for me, it always had to be a commercially creative venture. So, and the more visibility and freedom I had around seeing where we sat financially, the better creative I could be. So definitely, setting up that side of the business to allow you to work on the side of the business you want to.
Yeah. And of course, your current chapter is, you've just finished this book and you're kind of obviously promoting it. But I mean, the book was, as I mentioned at the start, I mean, it was incredibly open and vulnerable and raw. Did you worry at all about being so honest, like to share so much of your kind of personal struggles through the process?
No, it wasn't a concern. It was a prerequisite to me just personally. I don't know. I wanted to write a book that I wanted to read. And I'm not that interested in just straight out business memoirs. So I definitely didn't want it just to be that. And, the original working title of the book was Public Brand, Private Life. And when I started writing the book, I actually had a company. So, 6 months into that, I'd closed the company or decided to close the company. So I kind of plot twisted myself in a way. So had to, really look at the new purpose of the book. And for me, it wasn't, obviously everyone's, sees the highlights and the upshots. And then, you share a little bit about the hurdles and things like that. But the real element is paralleling that human element in between, because it's humans that are doing business. And I really wanted to share kind of what it takes of not only an individual, but of a team of people to get a brand to that level of commercial success. Because I think, we see the business elements, we don't often see what the human element is.
Do you think that that's ingrained in your personality, that you're very good at being very open and vulnerable with people in general? Or was that writing the book kind of tapped into something that you hadn't necessarily opened up before?
I think, I enjoy having authentic conversations, and I think to want that in return, you have to offer that as well. In 2016, when I launched the Samantha Wills Foundation, that was kind of my first window into seeing not only the power of, but the need for vulnerable storytelling, specifically as it relates to women in business, because it was, at a time when Instagram was kind of at its peak glamour. And it's just such a dangerous, compare and despair model where we sit there scrolling on this never-ending pit of, filtered images and filtered, hype stories. I needed to, for me, I looked back at 21-year-old me looking at, the inspiration pictures on my pin board of, these glossy images that reflected nothing of the reality back to me. And so, probably 13 years into that journey, I'm like, I've walked this path long enough to know that, there needs to be more transparency around it. So I don't know if it is innately in my DNA, to be honest. I think when I saw the power of it and I saw the response to it, something in me ignited that really met it where I was meant to be, I felt.
Mm. And you also share in the book some examples of the kind of comments that you receive. I'm presuming this is in your DMs, but maybe even on your feed. There was what I found fascinating. It was like from complete adulation and kind of like, adoration of you, to like really quite vulgar comments, to really, like people sort of saying about, your weight, whether you were too thin or too big or whatever it was, like every end of the spectrum. And I mean, that's a lot for a person to kind of carry, like, to be kind of confronted with that kind of level of messages. And I'm sure that that's just like the very tip of the iceberg.
Right.
How do you deal with that personally? Like, can you just completely shut off to it, or does it ever chip away at you?
It used to chip away at me, absolutely. And now it just rolls off like completely. It means absolutely nothing to me now. But I wanted to put the array of those. They were just some of the comments that I picked out of the DMs, but the array of them to show that, one, you're never going to please everyone. Someone's always going to think you're too fat. Someone's always going to think you're too thin. Someone's like, it's just, we can hold on to these singular comments, but I'm like, there's an array of, you try and please everyone, you end up pleasing no one, is kind of the message behind it. And it's like, if you're going to believe your good press, you've got to believe the bad press. So in that array, it's like, well, it all just kind of cancels each other out, because it's, it's someone, and I try and picture it. I'm like, I picture someone sitting there writing those messages, because I can't ever imagine doing it myself. And that kind of helped me disconnect and be like, okay, that's not a me issue. That's whoever is on the end of that keyboard, yelling such vitriol. So, sorry, to answer your question, it did used to bother me. And I understand that, you open yourself up on social media to these things. But to anyone listening that's experiencing it, I would say try and picture someone sitting there typing so awfully. I'm like, that's it almost is comical, because you're like, that's just ridiculous. So that's how I kind of, characterize it in my mind to separate from it.
Yeah. And do you have any other sort of boundaries around Instagram, or in terms of like how you use it, or what you're happy to share, or what you don't want to share? I mean, and obviously you've been very open and public about your kind of health journey on there, and some other things. But, is there that line where like, no, that's for me, or what are your thoughts on that, boundaries with Instagram?
I kind of, and if I'm sharing something, I do it on the premise of, I kind of like, is this going to be helpful to people in the way that, we live in a world of 7 billion plus people. If there's something that I feel isolated in, I'm guaranteed that there's other millions of people that also feel isolated in it. So I kind of put it through that process. Is it helpful to people in making others feel not as isolated? And, specifically on my endometriosis journey, I share that because I knew nothing about it prior to my diagnosis, and then obviously doing self-research, learning more about it, but then realizing how truly common it is. And I'm like, this is such a common thing that affects 1 in 10 women, but no one's really talking about it. So I was like, man, we need to normalize this conversation. So that was very much around that. But I think overarchingly, it's more like, I'm not going to share something if I'm emotionally still, in the depths of it. I have to kind of be not so much out the other side of it, but, strong enough to hold that space to share. Because I think when you open it up to 200,000 plus people, it takes an emotional output, I think, to hold that space. So I'm quite conscious of that.
And so, of course, you're now in a sort of new chapter of your life with, having just finished the book. And so like what's happening in your world now? I mean, do you see this as a transitional period for you? Like, are you itching to kind of get, hands-on with a very specific project, or you just want to focus more on your foundation, or, like after having gone through so much,
right.
Is there part of you that's kind of craving, like when people renovate and then they finish and they're like, I kind of want to do it again.
Right. I say I'm technically unemployed at the moment. So I, obviously I finished the book and we're just wrapping up that book tour now, but I'm going to follow her lead, and hopefully she has a little life of her own that I'll follow. Definitely, we've just the Samantha Wills Foundation is now going to be home to a masterclass that we're just in the final stages of editing. So that's releasing in June. It's also going to be, a lot more tangible handing over. So if the book is the story of that entrepreneurial journey, then the foundation is the tangible elements. So, here's the Samantha Wills marketing template. Here's, documents that might help you. Here's my little black book of business contacts kind of thing. And, still working on project basis. So I work on, some other brands that I do spokesperson work for or create campaigns around. So everything's, got a underline of creativity and storytelling. But it just depends. It's very project based at the moment. The Samantha Wills Foundation definitely has my full attention. And then the other ones are fun creative projects.
So can you give us a little bit of an insight into like your days or weeks at the moment? I mean, obviously I know that you're kind of in full book promotion mode, but is there a bit of a sense of like, this is the sort of the layout of your life at the moment?
No, not really. It's still a bit different depending what I'm working on. But, a lot of time in front of the computer, it's, whether it's a creative project or writing. But yeah, I'm, been in New York for the last 10 years, and obviously air travel is quite rare at the moment. So that's still taking a bit of getting used to, I think. And I think even the, going from, I kind of explained it a bit in the book, where I'm like, if a brand gets to those commercial heights and it has your name, do you get that name back? Is that possible? So kind of, people stopped calling me Samantha at one point. I was SW to separate myself from the brand. So I think to, just kind of getting back into my body, into what that means without the jewellery label after it. So still navigating it, but it's feeling good. Yeah.
And I another kind of little kind of funny question I had in my mind was, I was thinking, do you wear jewelry anymore, or is that like, like what's your relationship with jewelry, or you just can't even look at it?
No, it's the very first piece of jewelry that I bought from another brand was the day after we closed. I went on to Net-a-Porter and I bought a 9-carat gold and like porcelain shelved and diamond bracelet. It was the very first. It was so strange. I don't know why. I was like, all right, I finished the jewelry company, I'll buy a piece of jewelry. But yeah, I like it. When like plumbers usually have really shit plumbing at home, or like, builders never get stuff done around the house. Like my relationship with jewelry for a long time was like, I just can't. But I wear a few fine and personal pieces, or pieces that I've been gifted. But more fine jewelry now.
Yeah. I was just curious about that. And actually, I did want to also I did also want to ask you as well, because you've created a beautiful home. You're in Bondi, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Is that where you're based? Yeah.
Yep.
And you've created a beautiful home there. And I often think, because with the books that I've created, I've noticed there's a bit of a pattern that many of the people who really invest a lot of time and energy into their homes are living somewhere else. It's not their kind of their birthplace home as such. Do you know what I mean? Like lots of them are expats or whatever. And so I think creating a sense of home is actually really important for them. And maybe for you, because you live in New York for so many years and sort of traveling backwards and forwards, what's your relationship with having a home? What's important to you about it?
I think, and I think it really embedded to me when I was, 6 weeks New York, 10 days Sydney consistently. So I really wanted to invest in those spaces, because when you're home, like you want to feel like it's a sanctuary to you. So my apartment in New York, even though it was like a traditional meatpacking apartment, it still felt like a Bondi house in a way, like the way I decorated it. And I think there's always those ties to home in some way, but it's and it's it's such your domain around creating a sacred space. And I think especially if you're working from home, like it's got to feel like a place that you want to create in. So that's paramount for me.
Okay, I've got some quick questions to sort of to finish up, and just whatever comes to mind. So,
Okay.
which 5 words best describe you?
I get very nervous at these things. Okay, I'm going to focus. I think creative, curious, empathetic, have empathy. Empathetic, is that a word? Yeah, okay.
Empathetic, yeah.
Empathetic, storyteller, and I've got 4. I can only do 4.
That's okay. I think actually a lot of people stop at 4. It's like the 5th one is just one too many.
No. I'll let you know if it comes to me.
Okay, all right, no worries. It could be related to your life or your career, but what's the best life or career lesson that you've learned?
I think it is to relearn your intuition language and understand how your body communicates with you. I think for so long, we've been taught that if you can't logically explain something, then it's not real. And, really getting back to, undoing of all of that information and getting back in our bodies and listening to what that is and understanding that language for life and business.
Yeah, that was something that really struck me, that whole decision process that you kind of had to go through to sort of when you decided to close the business. And I was thinking about, how does this relate to other people? Because obviously, that was quite a unique situation that you were in. But at the same time, we sort of live in this time when it's never been easier to open an online shop, for instance. And I think there are so many people that do that, and they have all these high hopes and dreams, but then the reality starts to set in. And there are some people who kind of have to decide, well, is this actually the thing that I want to be doing, to kind of keep going with it? It's a big decision, isn't it?
It is a big decision. And I think for so long we think you can't stop, or if something's good, you can't close it. And it's this traditional framework of things where we find ourselves and being like, oh, we can't do that. And it's like, well, why can't we do that? So I think really challenging when you find yourselves at that, self analytic stage, I think, of thinking we can't do something. And the other, I talk about crossroads in the book, but I think, when we're at a crossroads, and be it a life milestone or something much, much smaller, we're met with the choice of fear or faith. And faith is obviously, what our soul is nudging us towards to move us forward along our paths. And most of the time that entails not knowing what that step is, hence, like a leap of faith. But, our soul is always wanting to move us forward just a little bit, and a little bit out of our comfort zone, sometimes a lot, but, it's always just take that step forward and something will meet you there. But it's such a scary decision to make. And then I think the other option we have at that crossroads is the fear, which, is when our mind's job is to keep us in the familiarity. That could be, the familiarity of an uninspiring job. It could be a toxic relationship. It could be anything that's, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for us, but it's familiar. So I think that, we've got to look at those two options, and hand on my heart, I hope that, even though it's the harder decision, that we choose the one of faith over the one of fear.
I'm curious, do you still meditate? I know you mentioned in the book that you had sort of went on that journey of going to that retreat. Is that something that's still part of your life?
No, I mean, I do meditate in different ways. Like I run a course on the Samantha Wills Foundation where I talk about, creating space, and that, that can be found on a meditation pillow, but it might be found in the ocean. It might be found cooking. It might be found, I look at meditation now as what can you do where you kind of lose space of time, and where your mind is actively working, but it's not having to think too hard. So, you might be driving and new ideas kind of reach you, but it's because we're giving them, the space to land. So to me, that's what meditation is now. And I'm not sitting on a meditation pillow every morning by any means.
Yeah, to carve out that time is so important, and yet so hard, isn't it? But
it definitely, but it's, as creatives, it should be paramount. Like it should be the thing that we're like, we actually carve time to drive the longer way home if that's where we get our ideas. But I think we don't look at it that way.
Yeah. This might be a hard one for you. I don't know. What's your proudest career achievement?
Oh, there's so many. And in different senses, like a superficial one was having product on Sex in the City. That was a brilliant get for us. Being named as a breakout star for the New York Times, just things like that are just so truly surreal. I think on a very personal level, the team that worked alongside me building the Samantha Wills jewellery brand, I often say, when you ever so modestly name a brand after yourself, the people that choose to come and work in your organization, it's such an act of grace because they're coming to work to, build your dream. So we just had such an incredible group of women over the 15 years. And that's probably my proudest on a personal level.
Yeah. I think I was tearing up when you wrote that bit in your book. It was like, yeah, it is. It's very powerful, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
What's been your best decision?
Oh, these are really hard questions, Natalie.
It's fascinating.
I know. What's the biggest decision or hardest or best decision?
Best decision, and it can be like general life, whatever,
I think it goes back to intuition again. I think I've spent so long suppressing it in a way. I think when I consciously was like, okay, this is a real thing and this can really support my life, I really started to invest in researching it. I do a lot of study around the work of Carolyn Mass, who is an incredible spiritual teacher, but she's no bullshit. It's very, very helpful to me. So I think my best decision is leaning into that.
Yeah, and something that can adapt to so many different situations, I guess, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Who inspires you?
Oh, so many people. I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, like a really, really big Taylor Swift fan. Not a Swiftie because they act a little crazy at times, so I'm not going to associate into that fandom. But I adore her. I think that her music aside, which I love, I think the way that she has built her brand, the way that she does fan engagement, the stories that she tells, and so beautifully through each album, and she invites us all into that world. She just inspires me creatively and how she holds herself in the world. I have huge admiration for her.
That's really interesting because I don't really know her. Like, I know her name. I don't even know any of her songs. So yeah, I'll have to dig a little deeper in that. That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm gonna send you some playlists.
Okay. Okay, good. What are you passionate about?
At the moment, I'm passionate about finding a creative space or creative output that doesn't necessarily have to have a commercial outcome. I think for so long, with the Samantha Wills jewellery business, which was once my hobby, and then obviously turned to vacation, which is exactly what I wanted, but I didn't replace that hobby. And I think as creative entrepreneurs, if we're not replacing that hobby, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So through COVID, the first lockdown, I got back into paint by numbers. I did some floral coloring in things, and it was just a really nice time to just be and create and not have to worry about the outcome of it.
What dream do you still want to fulfill?
Oh, I would love to see Of Gold and Dust, my new book, adapted off the page. So whether that's into a television format or some type of audio format or something, I don't know, something more beyond the book would be an absolute dream come true.
I can very much see it as a film. As I was kind of, once I stopped crying, and I was just like, yeah, this would be a really good film. I mean, you wrote it so beautifully for someone who said that you weren't very good at high school and all of that, but
no.
Yeah, because memoirs can be tricky. Like I've read lots of books over the years, and sometimes they can be too self-indulgent. Sometimes they can be too much about trying to, moralize or tell a lesson to everybody. Right. Or do you know what I mean? Like there's that really fine balance between taking you on a journey and but feeling like you can connect to the story, like that you can see yourself in it in some way. And that makes a
lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, there was not a section that I I didn't want to just keep going. I mean, as I said, I read the whole thing like pretty much from about 8 o'clock till 2 o'clock. So yeah, it was, to have that momentum throughout the whole story. It was, I don't know, if you went through lots of rewrites or editing. Can you share a little bit about that, the writing process?
Yeah. It's as a first time writer, so that book's about 72,000 words, which is a general memoir length. But my original manuscript, which was literally just a brain dump, was 148,000 words. And I think as a first time writer, I'm like, all right, I just need to get all the stories down that could add to telling this story. And then obviously with a good editing team, they're like, okay, you can cut out this entire story, that can go. And, they just give you a lot of clarity and a lot of, back and forth to, go away, rewrite this, do this. So the editing process is quite intense, which I'm sure any author has said as well. But and as you know, it's the tiniest little details. And I think, I'm not a attention to detail type of person. I'm like a broad stroke person. So my poor editor, I swear to God, she's just like has a voodoo doll of me at this point. She's like just happy the book is on shelf where she doesn't have to put up with my terrible grammar. So, but thank you for your kind word. I'd love for it to be a film. And, there was 2 names in the book I had to change based on legal recommendations. And one of them was Jasper, one of the characters in there. And I was like, all right, well, that's not his real name, obviously. And I was like, what am I going to call him? I had to do it quite last minute before we went to print. So I was like, what am I going to call him? I was like, I thought back to, the movie The Holiday with Kate Winslet and Cameron Diaz, and they switch houses. Yeah. And so Kate Winslet's character, is he's seeing this guy, Jasper. And I was like, yeah, he's definitely going to be a Jasper in this. So that name was inspired by a film character. So if it translates back the other way, that would be brilliant.
Did it take you a while to find your writing voice though? Because for me, when I was writing my first book, it actually took me so long to find, and it's obviously mine is like I always get this wrong, which sounds so terrible. Well, they're both non-fiction, but mine, obviously a very different genre. And it just it took me a long time to get my right voice because, I've written for magazines a lot and I'm often writing in the tone of Real Living or House and Garden or whatever magazine, that kind of thing, to actually find my own voice. Did you struggle with that, or was that not that just came out?
I think when you're writing like first person, and in the emotion of memoir, it wasn't that difficult, but I do know exactly what you mean. Like if I'm working with a brand, I go into like advertising, tone. And then if I'm working on, something else, so I can see the difficulty to style shift. For me, I think it was quite a luxury to be able to do it firsthand in that way. So I didn't find it too difficult.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. But like I said, it's a very good story. And
thank you.
So you're welcome. What about you? What are you reading at the moment? Are you reading any books?
Yes, I am reading, I've actually just ordered, it hasn't arrived yet, but Heartsick, the new one by Jessie Stevenson, I think her name is. But I'm quite influenced by this bookstagrammer world that I've now found myself in. And if they're all posting about one book, I'm like, all right, I better get that book. So I do have a pile next to my bed. After this whole process, my vow to myself was to read a little bit more. But as I said, Carolyn Mass's, I read a lot of her work. What else am I reading?
What would you say is your favorite book by her?
Oh, all of them are very, very different. But Sacred Contracts was great. She talks a lot about fate versus destiny. Anything by Michael Singer is in that same vein as well. And I just bought the new one by the holistic psychologist who has a big following on Instagram. She's just released her book, and I was so glad I wasn't in the same release week as her, because going up against, she hit the New York Times bestseller list at #1 on her first day. So I was glad I didn't have to go up against her, but it is a brilliant book.
Yeah, I'm actually reading Michael Singer at the moment. I always have about 10 books on the go at once.
Yes,
depends on
same.
what mood I'm in for a particular day, but I do read sort of business books as well, and a few things like that, as well as to do with thought. But I'm reading the Untethered Soul, I think that's what it's called, by Michael Singer.
That is brilliant.
Yeah. I've heard
And
him
have you read his
interviewed.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just saying, I've heard him interviewed a few times, and I've really liked what he, his theory or philosophy on all of
Yes.
that, but I hadn't actually read the book, and it's just, I'm just kind of nodding the whole
I
time
know.
at the moment.
It's like, is he talking just to me? Like when you're reading it. His other good one is the Surrender Project, the Surrender Experiment, which is absolutely brilliant. Which is kind of memoir, but he talks about the universal guidance, and he literally dedicated his whole life to like taking universal guidance, whether he wanted that guidance or not. And it's quite fascinating how it unfolds.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you another question, a little bit off track, but related to that. Because you do talk about going to see a clairvoyant in the book. Yes. And obviously you go and you had a partner, a boyfriend that was into mindfulness, and you talk about that. You went on a meditation retreat, and you talk about this idea of like trusting your intuition and faith versus fear. Like what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you believe in fate? Do you all of that sort of side of spirituality?
Yeah.
Like where do you sit in it?
I try and differentiate fate and destiny, kind of like I talk about the crossroads before. I'm like, I believe we're put on this earth for a purpose, and some of us fulfill that, and that's our destiny. And our soul and our intuition is always trying to guide us in that way. It might not be what we exactly want, but it's when things go in flow, when we feel like we have purpose, and it doesn't always look like we think it might look. And then secondary to that is fate, and you kind of, even if you hear the language around it, like, oh, it was destined to be, you're like, oh, that was a fated outcome. So I think fate is more if you just, stay in the same spot and, make that decision based around fear. It's like, well, it's familiar, I'm just going to stay. That's, so, I don't know if it's minutely guided down to the very, micro of it, but I definitely think there's pillars along the way of that are predetermined. And if if we're listening to our soul, that's when we progress a little bit further down that path.
It's something that like it just makes my head spin sometimes.
Yeah,
those ideas, like, because there's some things like we're all so different, and we're on all such different journeys,
right.
And yeah, I don't know. And then like you give the examples of the clairvoyant. I mean, I still don't know what I think about all of that side of things.
Yep.
But there is definitely that being true to yourself and knowing that and that kind of reconciling with that. I think it can be, I don't know if everyone struggles with that, or I know I have moments where I sort of, struggle with that. And I don't know, I think we talk about it a lot as humans, but we don't as well. Like, I don't think we have really honest conversations about it.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think what it all comes down to, no matter what angle or religion or belief that we're coming from, is it comes back to intuition and this exchange of energy. In, like, I explain it to people, I'm like, when you walk into a room after someone's had an argument, and you might use the phrase like, oh, you could cut the air with a knife, or it feels, it was like a heaviness in the air. I'm like, that's the complete observation of energy, or, in any type of form. So I think at the end of the day, there's so much happening that we can't see, that we can tap into if we're in tune with it.
Are you listening to any podcasts at the moment? Do you like listening to podcasts?
I haven't for a while. I've got more into audiobooks, which I was doing before I did my audio read. So I'm not a good, I do like true crime though. So I do like a good true crime podcast.
You're one of those.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah. There's definitely a huge section of the population that's really into that. I think it's one of those things. Yeah, I think I couldn't start listening to one because I know I probably would actually get really hooked. So maybe I'm deliberately staying away.
Right. I do feel there's a whole movement around internet sleuths that, take it upon themselves. It's a whole underground movement. So I'm not in that genre, but I do like a good true crime one.
And finally, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, I think overarchingly, I think if I had that opportunity, I would say, don't try and please everyone, just focus on what you're doing and be true to yourself. And I think for a lot of my career, especially in those early days, I tried just to people please absolutely everyone. And the lesson I learnt was, when you try and please everyone, you end up engaging no one. So just stay true to yourself, and who is meant to find you will find you at that level.
Okay. Oh, that is such a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Samantha. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for indulging all my very specific questions about that.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for the platform that you provide to facilitate these type of creative conversations. It's so brilliant and so appreciated. So thank you.
That's so nice of you to say. Thank you so much. All right, great. Thanks. I hope that you enjoyed this interview with Samantha. If you did, I would love if you could share it with a friend or someone who might get a lot out of this particular conversation, as well as rate and review it on the podcast app where you're listening to it today, and subscribe too if you enjoy these types of interviews. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great week. All of the links and info you need to access for this episode are at nataliewalton.com/podcast. Thank you to Jaeger Media for producing this podcast and the people of the Bundjalung Nation where it was recorded. I look forward to connecting again soon. I'm Natalie Walton, and you've been listening to Imprint.